The mayor is the wholly owned subsidiary of the Chicago Teachers Union and Stacey Davis Gates. They literally give Gates and the Teachers Union everything they want. In the last 20 years, Chicago has seen the largest exodus of blacks of any city, including Detroit. Why are they leaving? Crime, taxes, absence of quality schools. His housing initiative is all rhetoric. They've committed $300 million in housing subsidies to developers, politically connected developers. There's underreporting going on, plus people have given up calling in the smaller crimes.
Welcome to the Illinois Policy Podcast. It's been over 2 years since Mayor Brandon Johnson became mayor here in Chicago. What have those 2 years been like? How has the least popular mayor in Chicago done? And what could have been different if it had gone the other way? Well, who better to answer that than the other way himself? Paul Vallas, Paul was CEO of Chicago Public Schools, budget director for the city of Chicago, and this close in the 2023 mayoral election. He's a policy wonk, expert in all things Chicago, and my good friend. Paul, thank you for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me.
Paul, what do you think would have been different in Chicago? What could the city have been like if things had gone the other way?
Well, all I can do is really talk about what I would have done. I think we would have tackled the financial problems much quicker because the mayor not only obviously controls the city budget, he also controls the school's budget as well as the CTA. And really the mayor has just basically punted on all three. So now we're facing these gigantic crises. The city with $1 billion structural deficit. Plus he's failed to realize that in many respects, his constant, almost blind embrace of the Chicago Teachers Union, their contractual demands, their unwillingness to allow the superintendent to find efficiencies in the budget, that the school's budget is actually undermining the city's budget. Public safety is really simple. The mayor just, he is defunding the police, and without realizing that if you eliminate police positions, you ultimately don't save a dime because you ultimately end up paying more in overtime. Just the amount of money being spent on overtime alone, you could hire another 1,500 police officers. But I would have really pushed for a return to community-based policing, where you have beat cops, where you have 911 calls being responded to. When those calls come in, about half the 911 calls are not high priority 911 calls are not responded to in real time because there's not a police car available. Having beat cops who are known to the community and in turn known to the community. Those are things I think in terms of just a practical public safety strategy. That's something that would have been different too. And I think the third thing is really having an investment strategy for the South and West sides. The mayor talks about, and you see it in his campaign rhetoric, how we're investing in people. For a mayor who has a progressive agenda, I don't think I see anything progressive about it at all. If you identify being progressive as investing into underserved communities, his housing initiative is all rhetoric. I think to date they've committed $300 million in housing subsidies to developers, politically connected developers, who have promised 500 units. They're not producing affordable housing. Finally, when it comes to Springfield, having been a veteran of Springfield, having worked in Springfield for 12 years, not to mention lobbied Springfield when I had various city positions, I would have gone to Springfield with a very specific city agenda, which he has failed to do, whether it's on schools or whether it's on taxes or whether it's on public safety. The governor said it himself. They never see the mayor. They never see the mayor's lobbyists. They really haven't gone to Springfield with a practical, realistic agenda that Springfield might be willing to embrace. So I think on all those levels, things would have been different. I think we would have had a successful 2 to 3 years. And I think the budget challenges we would have been facing this year, both in the schools here and of course CTA, would have been much more manageable because we would have from day one worked in a coordinated way to address those budget challenges.
Well, let's talk about that because Johnson is now out there starting, these public conversations in advance of the budget address that he needs to make. And he's been talking a lot about, going against elitists and millionaires and it's the bad corporations. I mean, is that the reality? Is that how you have to fix the budget? Is that, how realistic is it? How necessary?
Well, they clearly don't want to deal with the spending side. And when I talk about the spending side, if you look at the city budget, the biggest increases in spending have not been in personnel. They've been in contractual services. I mean, actually, personnel spending at the city level has pretty much tracked inflation. So there hasn't been, the city payroll has not ballooned. What this city's paying on personal services has not ballooned, but the contractual services has skyrocketed, et cetera. So at the end of the day, he hasn't tackled those issues, or he's failed to tackle those issues. And on the school side, look, I said it during the campaign, and there nothing that has occurred the last 2 years dissuades me that this is in fact the case. The mayor is the wholly owned subsidiary of the Chicago Teachers Union and Stacey Davis Gates. So at the end of the day, they literally give Gates and the Teachers Union everything they want. And when you consider that the schools not only get 56% of all the property taxes that the Chicago residents pay, but they also get an additional $1 billion plus in additional subsidies from the schools. The school districts' inability to balance their budget and to bring their spending in line and to bring efficiencies to the school spending is in fact not only destroying their financial health, but it's also just undermining the city's financial health. So the biggest problem right now is it's almost as if the Chicago Teachers Union is running the city.
You're talking about the spending. And so with CTU in charge, they're never going to cut down on their own people. But you've crunched the numbers in ways that other people may never. What's the story with like the central office staff? Like, where is there room to make? No one wants to cut education, right? Especially if they're saying it's underfunded. But like, what's the truth?
I'm happy to say that that IPI, Illinois Policy Institute, has been covering this the better part of 4 or 5 years. Particularly since COVID, that they've been using the one-time COVID money that the federal government gave the schools $2.8 billion in federal COVID money. And they went out and they added 9,000 additional positions. Now, they were already a school system that had one employee for every 8.5 kids. Well, now they have one employee for every 7.3 kids. Think about this for a second. You have a school system that has one employee for every 7.3 kids, and they're complaining that they don't have librarians, okay? They don't have enough counseling, or they're cutting crossing guards, okay? So one employee for every 7.3 kids. 23,000 of those employees are not teachers. There are more non-teachers than there are teachers. Almost 8,000 of those employees are central office, regional office administrators, citywide service providers, et cetera. They're not even in the schools, or they're not permanently assigned to the schools. So how's that money being spent? And again, they added 9,000 additional positions. I think IPI points out not all those positions were filled, but I think their headcount is almost 7,000 above what it was in 2019, despite the fact that they lost, 10% enrollment. So literally, they've been hiring more people and spending more money and increasing per pupil spending by 43% since 2019, since COVID hit, and they can't balance their budget. You wonder why they're in a financial crisis. And unfortunately, their financial crisis is dragging the city along, particularly now that the Chicago Teachers Union has one of their own running the city.
I think it's really hard for Chicagoans to see this, right? You love this city. You want kids to get a good education. You don't want to pay more taxes. It's got to hurt if you're a taxpayer and you see your property taxes going up and you're not able to send your kid to selective enrollment schools and you're not getting them educated at, the public schools.
Well, we have to understand what's happening here is, first of all, taxes and fees are out of control, not only in the city of Chicago, but in the state. IPI has been very aggressive about pointing out that if you live in Illinois, you pay the highest state and local taxes in the country. In the country. Not, of all 50 states, you are paying the most. I think they pointed out that it's like, $13,000, $14,000 per family. And they're talking about the tax differential. If somebody moved to Indiana, they would pay about almost $6,000 less in taxes. The bottom line is we are the most taxed state Yet, ironically, we rank 50th in equity. In the last 20 years, Chicago has seen the largest exodus of blacks of any city, including Detroit. Well over 250,000, overwhelmingly middle-income families with children.
Huh.
The adult population, the adult black population in Chicago over that period of time has declined 17%. The children, the population, the percentage of the drop in black children population, 46, 47%. Why are they leaving? Crime, taxes, absence of quality schools, and people are not moving to Florida or Texas. Actually, the states that have been the recipients of the largest number of residents who have fled, there's Florida, Wisconsin, and Indiana. So they're just moving. Most of them are moving right across the border, and obviously Texas is a driving point. The problem with the schools is it's not only we're spending so much money, and let me point out that Illinois spends between 19% to 64% more per pupil than surrounding states. So we are spending more than our neighbors. It's not only that we're spending a lot of money, but at the same time, we're not allowing the schools to use that money in ways that can improve student achievement, because the collective bargaining contracts limit your ability to really restructure schools, to make changes in schools, to improve student achievement.
I guess I'm curious because for someone who is looking at this and envisioning, what could local school councils be doing? How would they choose to change? Like, if you could just wave a magic wand, how could things be different where you have more money flowing into the students? Like, what would that even look like? How would it take shape?
I'll tell you what we did in 1995, going back before you were born, by the way. And before your producer was born. And yes, I was bald then too. But anyway, the long story short, in 1995, the school system was on the verge of collapse. So the Republicans, led by Jim Edgar, gave the mayor control over the schools. They consolidated the revenues that went to the schools, and they removed obstacles to making changes in schools, basically telling the union, you can strike on financial issues, but you can't strike on issues involving education models, raising standards, and things like that. So what happened was we not only balanced the budget, but 6 years later, the school district had almost 40,000 more students. It had lost 115,000 students the previous 15 years. For a 7-year period, enrollment soared, and the schools were left with cash balances of almost $1 billion. Now, what do? We did some very simple things. The first thing we did was we gutted the central administration and central office. In other words, we really did school-based budgeting, where we built our budgets around the schools. The idea here was to maximize the amount of money flowing to the schools so that the schools would, the schools would be the primary recipient. So
books, library.
Exactly. And to give them discretion, not only on how to spend their overall budgets, but to give them complete discretion on their spending of Title I money, poverty money. And there were high schools that got well over $1 million in Title I money. So they were able to get that extra librarian or extra staff or extra counselor. The second thing we did was we really empowered and supported the councils. Now, I clashed with some of the councils because I was an accountability freak. You know what I mean? So if a council made a bad decision, I wouldn't hesitate. But I grew to appreciate this idea of local control. So you had elected local school councils and their principals had a lot of autonomy on how to spend that money most effectively. And then the third thing we did was to try to figure out a way to make the schools attractive by magnetizing schools. Not only did we open a number of new magnet high schools, they always say college prep. Well, all the high schools technically are supposed to be college prep. But the point is, we opened 6 or 7 versions of Whitney Young's. But we put magnet programs in neighborhood schools like International Baccalaureate programs, World Language Academy programs. The whole idea was to put programs in neighborhood schools that made those schools attractive So the bottom line is we gave people a reason. We gave people a reason to go to schools. We made those schools attractive. We gave those schools the autonomy to make changes at the local level. Right now, it's like the unions are there. They not only oppose charters, they oppose funding for private schools, they oppose alternative schools. They're even trying to undermine the magnet schools because the magnet schools are an embarrassment to them because the magnet schools outperform the neighborhood schools and they offer an embarrassing contrast. So they want to have these very rigid, union-dominated neighborhood schools with very limited autonomy and flexibility. But of course, those schools are struggling and many of them are failing.
Because you spent so much of your career in schools, it's natural for me to ask you a little bit about education. And you're talking about, so there's one thing that's happening in Illinois right now. Illinois just lowered our education standards. We said, what it takes to be proficient, we're going to decrease that. But you're almost saying from experience that if you raise standards, kids will raise to meet it?
Well, there is a systematic abandonment of standards. And we have to understand that this is happening nationally because it's almost as if the unions have given up on they have no answer to academic underperformance. So what they're doing is they're faulting the tests. They're trying to change the report card or get rid of the report card altogether. So you've seen it. You saw it at the state level. They're claiming that they're bringing their standards, their equivalency or proficiency standards in line with the national standards. Now, what you're doing is you're lowering standards. Don't try to pretend or rationalize what you're doing. You're lowering the standard for proficiency so you can show that more students are meeting proficiency. And I think Illinois policy, again, pointed out that on the NAEP exam, the test scores are abysmal, and they've been abysmal. And the public schools have not returned to their pre-COVID NAEP scores, where the Catholic schools and the private schools are thriving, many of the charter schools, in states that did not restrict them and force them to stay closed like they did in Chicago for 78 consecutive weeks during COVID. Those schools are thriving again. But the Chicago public schools, the anti-social promotion, they have stopped holding schools accountable or teachers accountable in their evaluations for non-student performance. Those aren't factors that are really being considered to any degree. And they've even stopped, per board policy, the ranking of schools academically. So you're not going to be able to tell how your school is performing unless you hunt down and go on the state website to try to get the state test scores. You're not going to be able to see how the schools are performing vis-a-vis other schools because the mayor-controlled school board, in its wisdom, decided that we're not going to rank the schools by academic performance. Stacey Davis Gates has gone as far as to claim that testing is like the creation of white supremacists to basically punish black students or to hold black students down. I think what she said is actually harsher than what I articulated. I think I kind of did the soft ones on that. But the bottom line is that they're basically blaming testing and accountability on race. They call people who support school choice Southern segregationists. So they're just throwing out those words and those claims willy-nilly. But their goal has been their programs are failing, so they want to erase any evidence of that failure. And that's why they're attacking standardized testing. That's why they've returned to social promotion, so they can...
Which is the practice of moving someone to the next grade, whether or not they are failing.
Yeah, so for example, I think I'm getting these numbers right. 10% of black high school students are meeting SAT proficiency standards in reading, and I think 8% in math. But yet, black students had a 79% graduation rate. So they're just graduating them, even though they're not prepared for college. And then
they're not, when students not prepared for college, then that transition is extra hard. One last thing about education before we move on, but I think, if you live in any other area of Illinois, your choices are you go to your local neighborhood school, or you find a private school, or you homeschool, right? Like there aren't these robust school choice options. So I think people don't always realize if you go to other, like when I'm talking to mom friends who are living in other major cities, their options for starting a public elementary school are so vast. Like they have, wilderness nature schools and there's developmental schools. And so I think this idea of public school choice to some people just sounds really odd because they don't realize that it is more common elsewhere.
Yeah, well, it used to be more common in Chicago too. I mean, the whole strategy behind not only replicating the magnet schools like Whitney Young, but then going in and replicating the magnet programs like the International Baccalaureate program, which is an extraordinarily high achieving program. Every school that brings an IB into their high school is a school. Their enrollment improves, their test scores improve. So there are like 20, 22, 23 IB schools and the World Language Academies. The whole idea was to provide more public school choice. Now we opened charters and our biggest charter network was actually a network of alternative schools that were open for students that dropped out or students who had gotten incarcerated and they were released and they could not return to the neighborhood schools. We actually took a network of neighborhood alternative schools for overage, underachieving kids who had left, and we pulled them together and they formed a single charter. It's the Youth Connection Charter Schools. And incidentally, those schools have graduated 22,000 students since that charter was created in 1996. And they graduated about 1,200 a year. These are kids who have left the regular system. So the whole idea was to provide alternative schools or school choices for everyone, even students who had left or students who had gotten into trouble or students who wanted to return to school but were too old to return to school, to your neighborhood school. The whole idea was to provide more choices, but that's not what they're doing. They're trying the union's whole sustainable community school model is all about turning every school into a union-dominated school that gets funding, that gets a certain level of funding regardless of its enrollment, that is not impacted when the enrollment declines, that is a union-run school that is governed by this really restrictive union contract that prevents both principals and their elected local school councils from doing things in those schools that in any way impact the union members. And that's what they're pushing. And look, the sustainable community schools model is a disaster. The 20 sustainable community school that the district had up until this year, I think they've added, I don't know, they want to do 70 or something like that.
Yeah. 22.
Yeah. Well, they're adding 22 this year, I think. I don't know the number. But the bottom line is none of them are performing. Most of them are failing. I mean, their test scores are abysmal. They're all under-enrolled. And look, what's the model? What is it? Manly High School, West Side, 78 kids, 27 faculty. The high school was built for 1,200. When it had 800 kids back in 95, I remodeled it. It's a WPA school. It's a beautiful school, $10 million. Now it's empty. But yet they're keeping it open. Or how about Douglas, 36 kids, 22 faculty. You know what I mean? Are you kidding me? And IPI carried an article that I did for them comparing Manly School with Hope Academy. Hope Academy is this private school founded by a Catholic layman, outstanding school, one of the top performing private schools on the West Side, overwhelmingly Black and Latino students, high majority Black students, low income students, 300 kids, a waiting list of 400. Busting at the seams, 8 blocks away is Manly.
And they're graduating most of their.
And they're graduating most of them.
And yeah, college.
8 blocks away is Manly. Had I become mayor, I would have given them Manly, and they would have taken the 76 kids in Manly and enrolled them into school, along with another 100, 150, 200 on their waiting list. But that's what the union is blocking, and they're doing damage to the poor. The poorest Chicagoans are suffering. Those who, for fate of where they live or what zip code they like, and the fact that the children were born to a low-income family, they're literally being denied quality educational options, and it's really a sin. It's really a disaster, and the teachers union is perpetuating it. And they have a mayor who's going to basically continue to provide the teachers union with both the means and the support to continue to do the damage that they're doing to the school children and the poor families of Chicago.
I think you've given some good food for thought for even what someone who's going to run in the next election should be
Right.
thinking about. And if there's any other issue that I think is like as important, but perhaps also as controversial, it's public safety in Chicago. You have, now there's national attention, there's Trump's coming out. But if you are in Chicago, it's certainly top of mind, but you don't necessarily want the National Guard coming out, but it's certainly public safety, something people care about and are invested in. So I'd love to hear from you. What is the truth about public safety in Chicago?
Yeah, look, right now the mayor's running around saying public safety is improving, the violent crime is down, and yes, he's correct. Violent crime is down, but it's down nationally, and what's happened is since the end of the COVID mitigations, and in particular the reopening of schools, the violent crime levels are returning to their pre-COVID numbers. Okay, and they're doing it nationally.
So is that up or down?
No, down. I mean, they're returning, and there's been a significant reduction in murders and attempted murders. But Chicago's not there. I mean, New Orleans, one of the most violent cities in the country. I think this year the murders rate's down 40%. Philadelphia's seen it. These are very violent cities, and the same thing with Chicago. So the bottom line is, and let me point out that people don't realize this. And again, I will saddle the Chicago Teachers Union with responsibility for this. The spike in crime nationally was in large part fueled by the shutting schools down. And cities that shut schools down for a longer period, like Chicago, had a much steeper climb in violent crime and a much slower return to, let's call it normal, or if people can call 400 or to 500 murders a year normal. But at the end of the day, there was during COVID, when the schools were shut down, there was a 50% increase in school-age youth murdered. About 80%, 9% of those arrested for murder were out of school age youth, 17 years and younger. Over half the carjackings, out of school age youth.
Wow.
So it was a huge spike. The huge spike in violent crime was driven by the fact that we shut schools down. And in Chicago, we shut them down for 78 consecutive weeks. So when the schools were reopened, the summer job programs were returned. The mayor's bragging about how he's increased summer jobs by 50%. He has barely gotten it to pre-COVID levels. He's just, COVID is over. He's returning summer jobs to the pre-COVID levels. But when those things vanish, the violent crime skyrocketed. So the decline in violent crime has occurred nationally. Now, Chicago, up until this year, lagged the nation until January. This year, Chicago, the national decline in crime, in violent crime like murders and attempted murders, have matched Chicago's matched the national level. We're not the outlier. Why? Because of Eileen Burke. Because Eileen Burke came in, became state's attorney.
Just this calendar year.
That's right, just this calendar year. And she stopped the revolving door catch and release policies of Kim Foxx that saw like 3/4 of those arrested and awaiting trial charges, violent felons being released to the community. And the county jail population has returned to its pre-COVID levels. So she can stand up and take a lot of credit for it, along with Snelling, who now is working very closely to get violent criminals off the street, to deny them bail, to get those who are domestic. There's been skyrocketing, even though violent crime has declined across the board. Domestic violence has skyrocketed. In fact, there's been over a 60% increase in the last year of increase in domestic violence-related deaths. So they're not protecting women and children. They have been releasing people, chronic abusers who are going home, and they're basically brutalizing their families again. So at the end of the day, crime is down, but we still have a real problem here. Chicago is still number one in the nation in the number of murders and attempted and shootings. We're number one among large cities in per capita murders and shootings. We're number one in youth and school-age youth murders. We're number one in mass shootings. In fact, if we were a state, only California would have more mass shootings than us. So we still have a violent crime problem. In addition, a violent crime, and I'm not talking about murders or attempted murders, but other violent crimes are being significantly underreported because of police staffing shortages. Because, as Wirepoint has pointed out, about half the high priority 911 calls that come in, there's no car available to respond. So a lot of times when the cars finally show up, it's over. There's nobody to file a complaint. In other words, there's underreporting going on. Plus, people have given up. Many people have given up calling in the smaller crimes. So the point that I'm trying to make is that there's been I believe that there's a significant underreporting of violent crime. So we have a crisis here. And what I've said in response to what President Trump did in Washington, D.C., and let me point out that Washington, D.C. is an enclave. So technically, one can argue that Trump's the governor, okay? I mean, he can't call in the National Guard or send federal troops if he elects to do so. Even though there's a 30-day limit, he's got to go back to Congress to get authorization to go beyond that. And, so Washington is not New York, it's not Chicago, it's not a city that has a state or a National Guard that's basically under the control of the governor. So I think calling the National Guard would be an overreach. And
in Illinois,
and or in any other state, you call in the National Guard when there's riots. You call in the National Guard when you need to protect governmental buildings. Like during the George Floyd riots, they should have called in the Guard. But the real objective here, if he really wants to have an impact, what he does is he puts together a federal task force. And he sends and he reinforces and provides more support for the federal agencies that are in the state, that are in the city, that are operating, like the FBI, the drug enforcement agencies, etc. Homeland, the Department of Homeland Security. So what he does is he dispatches those resources to the city to help make arrests and to bring individuals who commit crimes with guns and commit other offenses under federal law, under federal charges, federal prosecution. Because if you're arrested and you're charged federally, you can be denied bail, and there are longer, and I think in some cases for certain gun crimes, mandatory sentences. So you want to provide a real deterrent, then let him dispatch the full force of the government by using those public safety and agencies that are already here and that are already operating, ramp them up and have them play a more aggressive role. I think Snelling and I think Burke would welcome that. Of course, Johnson is going to hate that. I think Snelling would love to have DEA agents here or FBI agents here or basically federal agents here supplementing his police force and having a presence in going after violent and habitual criminals. And so that's something that I think Trump can do and he should do, and he could do in any city where that's neglecting its citizenry and not providing the public safety supports that are needed.
With someone like Johnson at the helm of public safety, the big budget there, you have the prosecutorial side, you have the police side. I think, are you pointing out that there's issues with both? I mean, when it comes to solving it, you're talking about bringing on more police essentially to help answer calls and then more prosecution?
Well, I think what I'm saying, I did a piece for you referring to Chicago as a sanctuary city for criminals because of the way they're not charged. Or do you realize that with the SAFE Act, right? With the Safety Act, they eliminated bail, and that something like well over 60,000 of those individuals who were released, who no bail, they committed crimes. Many of them are felons, and they were sent home. They blew off their court date. They didn't show up for court. Well, they should have all been arrested. Their bail should have immediately been denied. They got a postcard given in a new court date.
And they're just just wander around.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I mean, if I blow off my court date and I get a traffic ticket, they don't send me a postcard. They find me guilty and that's it. I'm screwed. You know what I mean?
So you have to pay.
Tougher. Yeah, the city's been tougher on people for driving between the red light cameras and the speed cameras and the parking ticket cameras than they are for people missing their court date. I mean, I'm talking about felons out on pretrial release, and they get a postcard because they simply blew off their court date. I mean, that's how absurd it is. I just think there's this anti-cop bias. And let me point out that there is a direct correlation between the number of police officers you have and violent crime. Now, when I was city budget director, I came in the previous year, there had been almost 1,000 murders in Chicago. And in part, we decided to hire more cops rather than pay enormous amounts in overtime. And of course, the Clinton cop bill provided additional funding, and we increased police strength to about 13,400 from about 11,500. And violent crime began to decline. And the murder rate, which had been 800, 900, the murder rates fell to the 400s for about, I think, over a period of 10 years. In 8 of those years, the murders were below 500. Now, that's still way too many, but the bottom line is there was a significant reduction in murders. When Rahm Emanuel came in and he didn't fill 2,000 police vacancies, the murder rate skyrocketed again. When he restored those police vacancies, it fell. And then when Lightfoot came in and she didn't fill the vacancies, it skyrocketed. And then when she started filling the vacancies, it fell. So there definitely is a pattern. And you have to understand, you don't save money by defunding the police because the police shortages are
lead to overtime.
Overtime. I mean, I paid $35 million in overtime when we were at full capacity. Now, that about 25 years ago, Chicago Police Department. In today's dollars, it would be about $60 million in overtime. Rahm Emanuel paid $100 million in overtime. When the police department was at full strength, when Lightfoot cut the funding eliminated the positions. Now, I think they reduced police strength by 1,700. She ended up spending $300 million in overtime,
which is where I think it is now. What with Johnson too?
It was about 250. But the bottom line is the overtime with that amount, just the difference between what Rahm paid when the police strength was close to full strength compared to what they're spending now, that difference could pay for another 1,200, 1,400 cops. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing on the CTA. This is the absurdity of CTA. There are more police assigned, or almost as many police assigned to the mayor's detail, security detail, and the police department has as many consent decree consultants as the CTA has full-time Chicago police officers assigned to providing security on public transit.
Which is arguably where people feel worried, right? You know, on a train, you never know who's going to get on or gun violence.
The CTA is in crisis in large part because their ridership is down. They're still down about a third of what they were pre-COVID. And the number one reason people don't ride the train is because they feel the train is unsafe. So, and what do you expect when you have, 130 officers assigned? I mean, how many stations do they have? How many hundreds of miles of tracks do they have? Or how many, what do they have, like 350 trains or something? I mean, really? Are you kidding me? But yet they're spending money on private security. And you see them. You can see them on YouTube. Whenever they're running from an event or they're slugging it out. I mean, I don't know what the physical standards are, the physical educations or the, physical standards are for hiring. But the bottom line is they're low paid, they're untrained, they don't have the power of arrest, they're unarmed. So with the money they spend on security, they could hire another 400 Chicago police officers and assign them to patrolling police transit stations and walking platforms and even riding trains undercover. And they could significantly improve security, which in turn would increase ridership and help the CTA, which is also facing a financial crisis, balance their budget. So this is not rocket science.
I think it's interesting to hear you talk just because when it comes to public safety, people go so much. You hear so much yelling from the extremes. You mentioned defund the police group. You also have, a more conservative take. So I think what Chicago is really missing is something just more rational. Okay, Paul, given everything, your breadth of experience, what do you forecast happens in Chicago the next few years? What are the likely current events that take place and what do you think needs to happen?
Well, look, I think Johnson's going to be a one-termer no matter what. He hopes that Trump will help revitalize him, because you see it with Kurtzker too. Everything is Trump, 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 Trump this, Trump that. They're going to blame Trump from everything, from sinking of the Lusitania to the Chicago fire. So he's hoping that he's going to be able to revive his fortunes by basically doubling and tripling down on the race card, and of course, basically attacking Trump. And I think I think some of his popularity might be restored because of that, but I think it's going to fall far short because people are getting tired of his shtick. I mean, every answer to every question is campaign slogan, and you can only double and try. You see it in the black community as approval ratings.
Everywhere in Chicago, he's not very popular.
Yeah, I don't see it changing. Despite Trump's best efforts to turn him into a martyr, I don't think it's going to work. And his performance on the national stage in these interviews with Morning Joe, I just saw it the other day, where he just refused to answer whether or not having 5,000 additional cops would be something he would want if he got everything else he wanted. I mean, the mere fact that he couldn't say yes or no on that simple question. So I think he's vulnerable. I also think what I call the three financial crises, the city facing $1 billion structural deficit, the schools will have another, regardless of what happens on this budget, the budget deficit next year, the schools will approach $600 million, and it's going to rising. And the fact that the CTA is facing almost a $600 million budget deficit, he has no solutions to any of those crises. So, other than the rail about billionaires or rail more and blame Trump, it's not going to work. He's going to have to cut services. He's going to have to increase property taxes. He's going to have to look for other taxes and fees. I think the whole screaming about billionaires is not going to result in. It's not going to help him. So his inability to manage those crises now into the third year of his administration is going to be his undoing. The question is, are we going to find a candidate who obviously not only can beat him, because I think in a runoff, I think any number of candidates could beat him, but are we going to settle for a candidate whose claim to fame is they're not Brandon Johnson? We really need to find a candidate who's going to move the city forward. There are pathways to solving the city's financial crises, as well as the schools, to addressing the issues of the CTA, to addressing some of the education issues that are articulated. Are we going to elect somebody who's not going to worry about longevity, but is going to focus on tackling the issues that need to be tackled, and really taking on the Chicago Teachers Union, who is so much responsible for the financial crises that we're facing in the city today? So at the end of the day, I mean, that's going to be the key. But there are some other races that are very important. The fate of the control of the Chicago School Board is not going to be up
in 2026.
In 2027. So the teachers union lost their candidates. They were defeated. They backed 10 candidates. Only 4 of them got elected, and one was
unopposed.
I believe that in the second round they're going to get the same results. So we have to ensure that Chicago Teachers Union does not control the Chicago School Board, or we're never going to get the reforms that are really needed. That's a big issue. The big issue of the Cook County Cook County Board President's race is going to be up. Is someone going to challenge Toni Preckwinkle, the chairman of the party? She gave us Kim Foxx twice. She gave us Brandon Johnson as chairman of the party. She was a longtime supporter of Brandon. She supported Brandon Johnson. She was the one who emptied out the jails. She was one of the architects of the Pretrial Release Act that has resulted in that also contributed to a spike in violent crime, and particularly domestic violence. So she's been a disaster. So are people going to realize that? Because she operates below the radar scheme. Because she is not only the county board president, but she's chairman of the party. And of course, she's presided over this disastrous contract with this vendor who was supposed to modernize the property tax system, the property tax assessment and billing system. It's been an unmitigated disaster. The bills are going out late. People are getting their second shock notices late. They end up paying their property taxes late, and then they get hit with heavy fines. It's an absolute disaster. And of course, local governments are not getting their money in a timely manner, so they've got to go out and borrow. So there's a lot of races coming up that we need to be focused on, and that people should be paying attention to, because even if a new mayor is elected who is not bought and sold by the Chicago Teachers Union, if the union controls the school board, the union controls 56% of the property taxes, and so if just electing a new mayor is not going to enable us to address the financial issues that the city faces. We've got to have a school board that's going to be thoughtful and that's going to be independent, and that we can work with to do what needs to be done in schools to address their needs.
Thank you, Paul. I think you've given a lot to think about. You're such a wealth of knowledge. I appreciate you coming to join us here.
Thank you.